in researching for this episode, I came across a book, and we know there are a lot of books in the Elder Scrolls games, all the way back through, the whole series, and then into ESO. There's new books dropping every season, every year of ESO. Mm-hmm. This is a book. Lotus, let me take you back in time. Let's go. They're in time traveling.
All right.
To
that's a time travel sound effect. Got it.
Yeah. It's from Wayne's World.
Yep. Oh yeah. No. Well, speaking of time traveling, there we go. We just half the audience won't have any idea what the hell that reference is.
Those are classic movies. Go watch the Wayne's World 1 and 2 movies. They go beedledee doot. And so here we're going back in time to August 17th, 1999. This is a time period where everyone thought the world was going to end because computers couldn't handle the extra digit.
Y2K.
Yeah, all of that, right? This is where we are, 1999. On the Elder Scrolls forums, back in 1999, there was a post from a book written by Michael Kirkbride, our favorite author. And I say that half sarcastically. We genuinely enjoy a lot of the stuff that he's done in the series.
The running joke is because everybody's like, "Oh, you're so critical of his stuff," and I was like, "No, he's probably added the most unique stuff to the series." Sometimes I prefer it when it's run through like a little bit of normalcy editing, and I feel like that's when it's at its peak.
It's constrained by some other people, but he's been a huge focal point of the lore. Yeah,
to be fair,
for years.
I feel his uniqueness is actually kind of missed in the series.
I agree. Yeah. So anyway, this is a book written by Michael Kirkbride in our world, but in the lore of the Elder Scrolls, it is written by the Temple Zero Society. The Temple Zero Society, here, I'll read you the little excerpt from the UESP, friends of the show. The Temple Zero Society, or more simply, Temple Zero, sometimes abbreviated as T0, is a secretive organization of scholars, conspiracy theorists, and revolutionaries which follows their own interpretation of Merikati philosophy and studies esoteric history, mythology, and metaphysical subjects. Their philosophy emphasizes the marvel and wonder of the Oribus at the expense of logic and internal consistency. They call the theories developed from the philosophy monkey truth. Okay, this all sounds very Kirkbridean. Basically, this is a society that is only referenced in a few little places. There's a reason why you don't come across this very much in the games. And they have a document that they've written called Cosmology, simply Cosmology. Now, let us get this. This book was written and posted at least to the forums before August 17th of 1999.
Right.
It was meant, or at least was planned, to be in Morrowind, which released a few years later. Also, Oblivion would have featured this game, but when you dig into the actual code, each of these books has an ID in the game code.
Right.
The ID for this game code is BK _ Estunan's Cosmology. I think that's how you pronounce it. And that reference, that ID reference, was actually given to a different book, The Less Rude Song, which is a funny poem that shows up as one of the books. So it seems like this document was originally meant to be in the games and either was intentionally pulled and some other book just happened to be given the same ID, even though that ID
we don't need to change the ID name necessarily. Just put this book in instead. But
that doesn't make sense because A Less Rude Song has nothing to do with cosmology, and so why would it be given that ID? The same thing, something very similar happened in Oblivion, where this book seemed like it was going to be added in, but then was swapped out based on the same ID being used for A Less Rude Song.
Right.
It's super weird. Also, we don't really know what Estunande's cosmology is, or if this is even Estunande's cosmology, because it doesn't actually mention him in the book. So there's a lot of weird mystery around this.
I mean, I don't know all of the however many hundreds of thousands of characters in the games over the years.
Sure. Yeah.
I don't know of anybody named Estunande that is of any degree of importance in the series. Another situation of like, okay, was this intended to be a character that mattered, or was this like a place marker? Another like fourth wall. Like a lot of this is going to be a little pulled back from like just being in game lore and more like the construction of some of the lore.
Right.
Which happens a lot with Kirkbride. Sometimes in the writing in the books is also breaking the fourth wall. So.
Very true. Very true. Now, another interesting point about this book, before we get into it, we're going to read through the whole thing. So don't worry. You're going to get our take on all of this. The radiant dialogue in Oblivion, which is the extra lines you get from certain characters that just kind of show up from time to time. There is one line of radiant dialogue in Oblivion that references Istunande's cosmology, meaning the book, as if that character knew about a book that existed in the world called Istunande's cosmology. This is the closest thing that could possibly be that. Plus, the original ID actually said that. So, for all intents and purposes, this is probably Istunande's cosmology.
Yeah, and to be fair, like, I don't know, the ID number, or like ID code, because not always just numbers or whatever, the ID code itself, I think, is the biggest sign that was intentionally like supposed to be this, like, this is what it was, because it's like it seemed like it was at least planned originally to be put in the game with that as the marker,
right? Like, so was it a mistake? Was it accidentally swapped by somebody who just accidentally typoed the code or something, or was this a document and they were like, okay, that goes a little too far, we don't want to reveal that much, or
it's like, this is too much information, so we'll skip that for now.
Right. So we don't really know, but here's what it talks about. It talks about the planets, the moons, space, Oblivion, the constellations, what the sun is, the sky, how the universe was created. And there's a little paragraph for each of these things. So here, let's dig into it. I'm going to read through this, and then let us feel free to chime in. We're just going to take this as it goes. So it starts off, and again, the title is Cosmology by the Temple Zero Society, an overview of the cosmological features of Mundus. Pretty clear, right? The first section says, what are planets? The planets are the gods and the planes of the gods, which is the same thing. So that's not too weird. We think about even the realms of Oblivion are kind of like the Daedric Prince and the realm itself are both deeply connected.
Like almost one and the same.
Right. So same thing for the planets. That they appear as spherical heavenly bodies is a visual phenomena caused by mortal mental stress, since each planet or plane, the T is in parentheses there because they're the same thing, is an infinite mass of infinite size. Let me say that again. Each planet is an infinite mass of infinite size, as yet surrounded by the void of oblivion. The mortal eye registers them as bubbles within a space. Planets are magical and impossible. The 8 planets correspond to the 8 divines. They are all present on the Dwarven orrery, along with the mortal planet Nirn. Okay, so already we're in deep. The concept of the divines being their own godlike entities. We've heard about that before. The concept of their planets being their own planes of existence. They're also who they are. But the way it's stated here, and it says they are of infinite mass and infinite size, surrounded by the void of oblivion, which is also infinite. And we as mortals just can't conceive of what they actually would look like because our brains can't conceive of infinity.
Right. So we make them spherical because it's something we can comprehend.
Right. And because we exist on a physical land on one of the planes called Nirn, we have this assumption that the rest of them are similar to that, when in fact they could be anything. They're infinite.
Yeah. So the only thing about that that's a little peculiar seems to be if they're infinite. I mean, I guess they don't really expand out in the series like too far out into the oceans or whatever, but it's just like, it seems weird that, like, I guess, so in theory you could just sail forever.
Well, if Nirn is infinite, but the next section is about Nirn. So
right. Well, get a little more specific with that, because I mean, I guess there's not any confirmation that Nirn, you live or can live on other planets.
Right. Nirn is finite, but the idea would be like if you were to go off to one of the other planets somehow.
Right. This is more talking about like the other planets, though. But like theoretically, we can fly to other planets in our solar system.
Right.
They're not the most habitable,
but they're also finite round balls of like matter.
But does that mean if you were to go to another planet, because this is a little weird and gets strange, but like there are some of the games that imply the Dwemer had airships and stuff, and
Sure.
the Dwemer have all these technologies. So given the resources on the Dwemer not being taken away, what if you went to another planet?
I think it would feel like a realm of oblivion in that it would be shaped and formed in a way to that you as a mortal could understand where you were, but does not actually show you the full extent and depth and complexity of what's actually there. That would be my guess.
Yeah, maybe, which again, I guess that kind of doubles down on the fact that they're like, well, the human brain can't comprehend this, so this is why it sounds so weird. So the fact that it also seems weird matches the fact that it's like, well, yeah, it only looks like a sphere because it doesn't make any sense. So.
Right. Everything is just kind of through a lens of, well, we are limited, so we only see a limited version of the thing rather than the thing of it in and of itself. So that's a little bit out there. It's a little bit. It takes a lot of the things that we've talked about, and feel free to go back and listen to some of the really early episodes where we covered some of this stuff. But it takes some of that stuff and expands on it. And by the way, those first early episodes for the first year of content plus are all of them are on the Patreon. So you're welcome to go check them out there. Some of those have errors. I was new to doing this back then, and so they're not all perfect, but you can go listen to them if you sign up on the Patreon.
It's also good when we can fact check each other to a degree off each other, as well as chat being here nearby to sometimes provide us answers instead of blankly having silence while we Google something. It's like, where did I see this? Right.
So, and we'll be going into some of the other versions of some of this concept in the upcoming episodes. But here, let's move on to the next one. What is Nirn? Nirn, and this is interesting, in parentheses, Elnofex for Arena, the original game, right? Talked about how people called Tamriel the Arena, or in this it's saying Nirn.
Yeah, I do appreciate them trying to almost move in the direction. I mean... This is definitely the evolution of the series that we talk about all the time.
Yeah.
They're like, yeah, okay, we gotta how can we get away from calling the game the Arena from the first game in the super early 90s? Well, I guess mid 90s. And get it to Nirn as the name. Oh, I know. Well, this is the name that people use for the arena, and that's the Elnofex, which we'll get into in a minute, version of it. It's like, oh, okay, sure, that's fine.
So you might be wondering, Elnofex, that sounds like Elnofe. Elnofex, so is this the language of the Elnofe? And this is their word for Nirn is arena, or their word for arena is Nirn? That would be a wonderful question. I have searched both all of the UESP and done some Google searching on the internet to see if Elnofex, F-E-X at the end, shows up anywhere else. I cannot find another reference to the word Elnofex. Now, maybe language of the Elnofe shows up in other places. I need to dig a little bit further for that. But Elnofex itself?
Yeah.
This is the only
term
instance.
Is not used
so
in the series. This is definitely, which again, one of the things where it's one of Kirkbride's strengths as well as one of his weaknesses is some of these creative thoughts almost seem like brief sparks of something that never become something else.
Or they started down a path and then
anyways, I've moved on, and then it's like, okay, but what did that mean? It's like, we've already moved on. It's like, okay, well, that didn't end up getting any context in the end. And maybe it's just because, Michael Kirkbride doesn't work there anymore. So maybe it was going to be filled out later or something. But his vision for some of these things doesn't always get fulfilled. So we'll get a little snippet and it's like, oh, what does that mean? And then you don't often get the full thing.
Yeah. So you might be wondering, what are the Elnofe, if that isn't a familiar term to you? The Elnofe were considered in some of the different groups to be either part of the early inhabitants of Nirn, the ancestors in some ways of maybe some of the intelligent species, that they were I guess they worked alongside, you could say, the divines in the creation of Nirn and all of that. But there's also theories out there that they are survivors of previous Kelpas, previous versions of reality that somehow made it from one reality to the next. We don't really know exactly who they are, but we do know, as far as we can tell, that they are an ancient species of some sort of people that existed way back in the Dawn era. So to say that...
Yeah, it's almost a resetting of time.
Right. It could be something like that. It could be that they are part of just like the parts of the godlike beings that the mortal races came from. There's speculation in both directions for that.
I believe it's somebody can fact check me if I'm incorrect on where this is from, but Hermaeus Mora, I believe it's from these forums, obviously a different time period, but where Hermaeus Mora was referred to as like an amalgamation of the scraps of previous Kalpas. That's why he's so weird looking.
Right. Yeah. So Kalpas is a whole other thing. We'll probably have to devote some.
We're not going to turn this into Kalpa theory.
Right. We're going to have to devote some actual episodes to each of those concepts. But just so you know, the reference here is ancient race that doesn't seem to be around anymore.
Yeah, we don't seem to see them anymore.
Talking about Nirn, and Nirn being the word for arena, which also might mean Tamriel in the original game. All of that. So anyway, Nirn is a finite ball of matter and magic made from all of the god planets at the beginning of time. So all the god planets, all the divines contributed to making Nirn. When Lorcan tricked, convinced, forced the gods to create the mortal plane. It's all the three of those things, maybe. Tricked, convinced, or forced, right? Nirn is the mortal plane and the mortal planet, which is the same thing. Its creation upset the cosmic balance. Now all souls, especially the Aedra, Daedra / gods, demons, have a vested interest in Nirn, especially its starry heart, Tamriel. Tamriel is the heart of Nirn, according to this.
Okay. I mean, sure.
Okay. Yeah, right. Like,
there's like a lot of prominent things on Tamriel itself. Mm-hmm. The center of Tamriel has obviously been quite the hotbed of important things that have happened, with the white gold tower being there and possibly Cyrodiil itself shifting like climates from time to time due
all
to
sorts of wackiness
major
stuff.
Events. It's like
Lorcan being killed, his heart being thrown into the ocean, which turns into Red Mountain. Like, so there's a bunch of crazy stuff that has happened in the past, seemingly. So
so it seems like, okay, Tamriel being kind of like the centerpiece of all of this. Sure. All right. I can see where that's going.
Right. So the next question would be, then what are the moons? We know what the planets are. We would know what Nirn is. At least we know what it seems to be, according to this. So what are the moons? Moons, small planets insofar as one infinite mass of infinite size can be smaller than another. So these are planes, even in the extent that the other planets are as well, infinite in mass and size. Planets do have orbits, or at least lunar orbits are perceived to happen by mortals because of the way that we perceive what we're seeing. Moons are regarded by various cultures as attendant spirits of their god planet, or minor gods, or foreign gods. Okay, so
a lot of or scenarios, yes.
Yeah, so that means if you have a planet out in the distance and there are moons around that planet, then those are kind of like minor gods that work in correlation with the major god, which also means that Massar and Secunda, and it says here, the moons of Nirn are Massar and Secunda. Moons are not represented in the Dwarven orrery. So it means that Massar and Secunda are...
I would say Secunda, but I don't know if that's actually like specific, so I'm not really going to correct you on.
Right, however you want to pronounce it. These two seem to be maybe minor god-like spirits to Nirn itself. That's a different take, because sometimes we get the take of like, oh, these are pieces of Lorcan that still exist out there.
Right.
There's also...
Yeah, this is kind of implying that might not be the case.
Right. But this is almost more in line with what the Khajiit would think about these two spirits in the sky and all of that, right?
Very, very much when it ties to Massa and Secunda, because it's like one of the things that I found fascinating when we were looking through this, which not to get too ahead of ourselves here, but like it using the UESP article, it's Massa and Secunda, Joan and Jode in the Elnifex. So this is where it's actually like mentioned. It's the same article, so that's why we mentioned it doesn't show up anywhere else. This is the same article. Like, this is from the same book. So
it says here in the next very next line that you're referencing, what are Massar and Secunda? Massar and Secunda, parentheses, Joan and Jode in the Elnifex, which most of the time when we hear Joan and Jode, we think Khajiit. We think it's like Khajiit speak, right?
And it's like, this is referencing that Elnifex thing again, which is not really brought up anywhere else. It's now mentioned a second time in this document or book. I guess it was supposed to be a full book, because books are made of an interesting amount of pages in the series.
Right. Books are like 3 pages long.
Yeah. Or sometimes they're like 100.
Right.
But yeah, so it's like, okay, so Joan and Jode in Elm effects, it's like, okay, so does that have some weird tie to the Khajiit then? Because that's very specifically what they always refer to the moons as of Massa and Secunda. So like, what is that tie in that we've never really seen or like had brought up otherwise?
Is this like language that descended into the Khajiit language and never really changed? Or, like what's going on there? Well, here, let's read the next section because this will help elucidate some other details. So Massar and Secunda, Joan and Jode in the Elnifex, the moons of Nirn, are the attendant spirits of the mortal plane. They are like the mortal plane in that they are temporal and subject to the bounds of mortality. In fact of this, the moons are dead and died long ago. This is also in line with what the Khajiit
so that tracks,
believe, right? The moons used to be pure white and featureless, but today gets super weird. Their skin, in quotes, is decaying and withering away. Their planes are likewise dying. Mortals perceive this as the moons being spheres with patches of their surfaces completely eaten away. As the moons spin, they seem to become slivers or ragged crescents. Now get this. These are not caused by shadows because you can see the stars through the black patches of the lunar surface or lunar spheres. So the moons do not appear to be completely circular. In fact, they appear to actually be crescents with a flat side or a more circular side, depending on the way the moon turns in reference to the viewer.
Tilted or turned. Yeah.
Right. And the skin is decaying and withering away, which is why we see things like maybe even like it's eaten away, which creates a crescent, but also it might be why we see things like craters and we see like a bumpy surface rather than a clean white flat surface because these attendant spirits are dead. They died.
Yeah. So this is where it gets interesting. And this kind of goes back to the point I brought up earlier when we get into, so it's referred to the fact that it's like moon, small planets insofar as one infinite mass or infinite size can be smaller than another. So these things, again, like planets, appear to have a shape, but they're
right. It's almost like they used to be infinite and of infinite mass and size, but they died, and so they've been decaying, and so they're less than they were
becoming
before.
Less, or is it an illusion? And this is where, during the Elsewhere chapter in Elder Scrolls Online, you briefly actually go to, I believe it's Jode that you land on.
Mm-hmm.
So you only experience a small portion of it, and it's part of this weird world-ending event thing that brings you to one of the moons briefly when you head to Jode's core. So, like, okay, if you were there and you weren't in game physics and you're instead in theoretical, like this is a real thing, could you just meander off and it would just be infinite in some direction?
Like I think at one point it may have been infinite, but because well, it says here they are like the mortal plane in that they are temporal and subject to the bounds of mortality. So, they may have started have started as infinite godlike things like any of the other planets out there, but once they tied themselves to the mortal plane, they became subject to the bounds of mortality. So they were subject to finiteness also.
Right. So they've died off. So theoretically they have like an end point.
Right.
But I guess the thing that's interesting is, does their shape, like if it was only appearing spherical before and now it's like it's more of a crescent, like you had mentioned, like is the shape changing over time as well as it decays?
I mean, and maybe the decay is what is causing it to look spherical and yet crescent. Also, maybe that
it's such a weird idea that it's weird. Like, oh yeah, it used to be infinite, but now it's finite, and it's finite enough that it's now not infinite and warping your vision to make it look like a sphere because now it is basically part of a sphere. It's so many things.
Or
it's like,
I mean, another explanation would be when they tied themselves to the mortal plane, they had to take on a limited finite shape. And so the initial shape was spherical.
That shape that it was like, oh, well, the other the other planets are like this, we'll match that.
Right. The other planets appear to be spherical to the mortals. So we will be spherical objects in the sky and limit ourselves to a spherical, finite shape and size.
Okay. I see what you're saying. Yeah,
and then they
right.
died because they were tied to the mortal plane. Something happened in the past, which this does not explain.
Yeah, no, we don't get that information.
And so they started to decay, which means that when they look like they're crescents, it's not because of shadows. It's because there's actually whole swaths of the circle, the sphere, that have been like eaten away.
Right, which also makes me curious. Where is that going?
I think some of it lands on Nirn because there are moon rocks and things that you can find in the games.
That's true. And like, well, there's the Khajiit thing with Moonstone as well. Yeah. It's like the little sugar stone. It's like,
so I think some of them fall
governed by the moons, if I remember correctly. So it's like,
right.
Yeah. All right. So yeah, it's like,
yeah. It's interesting.
High
like
on corpses.
It's a little crazy, but if you think about it enough, it can kind of start to make sense. So let's move on. What is space? Space is the interpretation of oblivion. We know that our perspective on all of these things are basically the mortal interpretation of infinite things. So it goes on and says, which is black and empty and surrounds the mortal plane. Space is infinite, but it acts just like a planet in that oblivion is surrounded by Aetherius. You can see Aetherius by the stars. So it's basically a similar cosmology to the idea that Nirn is in the center, oblivion is around Nirn in a sphere shape, even though it's infinite, and it is bounded by, even though it's infinite, Aetherius, which is outside and around that, and thus you can see the stars through the pinholes in the outer edges of oblivion, or
it's
whatever.
Infinity on infinity.
Right. Like you're in the center of infinite circles, and yet they are still bound by each other at the same time.
Yeah.
Which is crazy.
Which is weird.
That's what it says here.
Yeah, that's weird because in and of itself, it's almost breaking the concept of being infinite because there's two infinites constraining the other infinite.
Right. It's something that we just cannot conceive of being mortal, but to the infinite beings, they're like, well, this totally makes perfect sense. So, okay. And then it goes on and says, what are stars? The stars are the bridges to Aetherius, the magic plane. This is the first time I've heard the term bridges to Aetherius. Not just are these pinpoint holes that let in the light or the magic of Aetherius.
Right. So we get our little magica and stuff.
Right. But like each of these holes is a bridge, is a place that can be traversed in a way. It goes on, it says they are perceived as holes on the inside surface of space. Because they are on the inside of a sphere, all stars are equidistant from Nirn. Larger stars, therefore, are not closer to the mortal plane. They are just larger tears in oblivion. The largest tear in oblivion is Magnus, the sun, which is similar to other cosmologies that we've talked about. So that's the stars, that's the sun, that's space, the planets, and the moons. But that's not all. But we have to go thank our patrons first. So don't go anywhere. We're going to get into the rest of this when we get back.
This is Miss Morak, Dragonborn, and you are educating yourself to the Elder Scrolls Lorecast.
All right, here we are in the middle of the show. This is where we get to thank our patrons, including our Daedric Princes, Blinding Vision, Kira C, and Sheogroth Sweetroll. Thank you so much for your support. Thank you to all 108 of our current patrons for your support as well. You keep this show going. We couldn't do it without you. Thank you for being here. If you are interested in helping to support us, or if you'd like to get some really cool stuff like those really early episodes that are only available on Patreon, there's t-shirts and stickers. There's joining us on patron chats. You get episodes early. There's all sorts of fun things depending on the tier that you sign up for. Head over to patreon.com/Elder Scrolls Lorecast. Go check that out. Also, you can help us out by leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. If you do that, we'll read out your words on a future episode of the show. We don't have any new ones this week, but I still see the old one there from last week about fly high, brother, thinking that Lotus was dead.
That was so nice.
That was, Lotus isn't dead.
I'm still waiting to see if they catch up and
like update it or respond to another one and be like, oh, glad I was wrong.
Glad you're with us.
But you can do that. You can also rate the show on Spotify. You can share it with your friends, all sorts of different things that you can do. Oh, and you can check out the new t-shirts that I've got up on the merch site over on robotsradio.net. If you go to the merch button at the top, there's some new t-shirts. There's Lotus, did I send you these? I designed some new shirts.
I saw a couple in the Discord, but I don't think you sent them to me specifically.
Oh my gosh, I should put these up on the screen. I don't have this prepped right now. Okay, so there's one I designed with Mike the Liar.
Yes.
You know the meme where it's the dog in the burning house and he says, "This is fine."
Yep.
Yeah, it was Mike the Liar sitting there instead going, "This is fine." So there's that one, and then I did one for Skyrim that has a cartoon chicken with a cross, like one of those like no signs.
I haven't seen this
over
one.
it. Yeah, he's very sad, and it says Skyrim chicken abuse punishable by death. It's got a very sad chicken on it.
That sounds like my intro experience when I played Skyrim.
Yeah, absolutely. I think people can relate to these.
No guards in the first town, and you kill a chicken, and there's no forgiveness. It's just the penalty is death.
Yeah, lots of fun stuff. Go check those out at robotsradio.net. Lots of fun ways to help support the show, and we really do appreciate it. All right, let's move on with the rest of the episode.
You're listening to the Elder Scrolls Lorecast, dear child of cities. That is why the Night Mother loves you.
All right, we're back. Lotus, how do you feel so far about all this wackiness?
This is pretty... Some of this stuff I think is really neat. Some of it's just weird as hell. But I kind of like this. And the stuff we're about to get into, I also find interesting. So I'm curious what other people will think when we get into some of these, because some of them are a little, I don't know. All of this has been strange. So strange isn't a great way of putting it, but enlightening as to some of the other directions that I feel like the series has stuck to, but also veered away from. Is kind of like, because we constantly bring up the fact that the series is still active and evolving. So sometimes you'll see something that was brought up and they don't get rid of it, but it changes over time.
Right. Yeah. A lot of these older concepts are a little bit retconned as things move on. Or some of the theories people had, say 10, 15, 20 years ago, even though they've done a lot to kind of tie all the pieces together and go, okay, according to this document, according to this dialogue, whatever, that means that this thing in the middle seems like the likely thing. And then as the series goes on, it's like, well, they do something, they go in a different direction. And it's like, that was a really cool theory, but it didn't really pan out, or at least it never really got confirmed or even deepened with future lore.
Sure.
You know, there's other ways of seeing that stuff. So yeah, it's interesting. It's a constantly moving, evolving thing. But here, let's get back to the document because we've got more stuff to talk about. So what are shooting stars then is the next section. And it says a misnomer. Shooting stars are bits of matter and magic, either from oblivion or Aetherius, that sometimes move through the cosmos. The largest shooting stars are really planets with independent orbits like Bandar, the rogue planet. So there are other planes of existence out there in this infinite expanse of oblivion that are just kind of moving around up there,
doing their own thing.
It's just so complex, and this leaves so much cool openings for these other concepts, other Daedric things going on, other unexplained phenomenon that we may only be glimpsing at a distance and seeing as things like shooting stars or whatever.
I also really appreciate that it's like, oh, what's a shooting star then? Just completely flat. It's a misnomer. It's wrong.
It's wrong.
It's just like, oh, all right.
Right. It's not actually a star, but it's a plane.
It's
a plane in the
there's
cosmos.
Magic planes just floating around.
Right.
Like it's one of those. It's like, all right then.
It might be matter. It might be magic. It might be from Oblivion.
You don't know.
It might be from Aetherius. It may have just fallen through the openings
it just
in the
slipped
sky.
through one of the cracks and just came through. Now it's floating around in Oblivion.
Right. You don't know. We don't know. So that opens up so many other possibilities. Like, what if some weird plane of existence crashes into Nirn? Like, holy crap! What could come out of that? It's crazy stuff. All right, it goes on.
Get a weird Armageddon video game spin-off.
Yeah, you know, if they were to do that, if they took a concept in like Elder Scrolls 6 and they crash this plane from a shooting star onto the onto Nirn.
All right.
And let's say it lands somewhere in Hammerfell, and that's Elder Scrolls 6, because they're dealing with this like weird incursion, even though it's not an intentional incursion. People would be like, oh my God, that breaks the lore so much. And it's like, well, did you... Like,
what about this weird document that you probably didn't know about?
Right, about this weird document. What about the fact that all of this other metaphysics and, cosmology stuff is all kind of just speculation by people who really don't know exactly the details?
Well, the other thing that's weird as well, before we move on from that concept, is the idea of these, if I'm not wrong, these, since they're technically planets, they would be of infinite.
Yes. Right.
So,
or theoretically could be of infinite.
Theoretically, right. So theoretically an infinite object could slam into
a finite amount of space. Yeah, finite, I get where you're going. But maybe maybe it's just like Joan and Jode. Maybe the coming in contact with a mortal finite plane then redefines what it is, and it becomes it has to function in a way that can be perceived by mortals.
Maybe, or it dies off while it's making the interaction because it's coming into a mortal plane. It's just funny that it's like infinity slamming into totally a corporeal thing.
Right.
Oh boy,
right.
That's getting weird.
But it also explains why Lorcan could be killed.
Sure.
Right? Because maybe he was on the mortal plane at the time, obviously.
Right.
And therefore had to abide by the limitations of mortality. That could be a thing. I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of speculation here. Like if a Daedric Prince comes in, like maybe that's why Daedric Princes are, they take over people or they talk to you through some sort of magical means rather than actually being on Nirn, because that would cause them to be.
Yeah, they don't want to be
limited.
Yeah, they don't want. Well, I mean,
or potentially killed.
Sure. And I mean, like when you have some of the Daedric events that happen and you interact with actual Daedric princes, Mehrunes Dagon specifically during like the Oblivion Crisis, you mess up Dagon pretty good. Like, very specifically, when they have the giant dragon off at the end there.
Right, the big fight at the end of Oblivion.
And like that, clearly he's able to take like substantial damage, even like on the mortal plane. Did that have an impact on it? Because there is a separation there when it's like, okay, well, there's only so much they can do to break through, and that's why they use vessels and stuff like that oftentimes. And they will show up here and there, but oftentimes they can't just overtly come in and just start kicking over houses all the time. Like,
right. I think that
really
they're limited
like that, especially when you have the Dragonfires were lit for so long, and it's like, well, that's like the blockade. Right. But it gets a little weird.
Yeah, I think that there might be some terms of limitation which might coincide with this idea that they have to, in order to manifest in a mortal plane, they have to manifest in a physical limited form, a non-infinite form, which makes them vulnerable, which is an interesting concept. It's something that doesn't really get covered. All right, but we got more of this document. We got to get through the rest of it. So what are constellations? Constellations, this one's interesting because the constellations get talked about fairly
this one's
regularly. Constellations are collections of stars. Since each star is a bridge to magic, constellations are very powerful phenomenon and are revered. They are generally accepted to be 13 constellations. 9 of these are made up completely of stars. 3 others are called guardian constellations, as they are each governed by a dominant planet. The dominant planets are Akatosh, the Eye of the Warrior, Julianos, the Eye of the Sage, and Arche, the Eye of the Thief. This coincides to so many other things. The level up screen in ESO, the concept of the warrior, the sage, and the thief, or the warrior, the mage, and the thief.
That's what I was about to say. One thing that I really find interesting is that they originally had it, well, at least for this, I mean, this wasn't canon because we had mentioned that. It's there, but not there type of deal. It's interesting that it's referred to as the warrior, the sage, and the thief, rather than the warrior, the mage, and the thief.
Right. And there's only 3 of these planets which represent the major constellations.
Right.
Because they're gods. And so that would mean that any of the other planets are like maybe tied in a minor way to the constellations, but not completely. Or maybe they just don't tie into constellations at all. According to this, that leaves that open. But then it goes on and says the last constellation is made up of unstars and is called the snake. What does that sound like?
So that's actually really cool because it's like, okay, so there's our serpent.
Right.
And it's like
Sithis?
Yes,
Maybe?
and it's like, the serpent plays a big thing if you do the Craglorn, because you kind of deal with the physical manifestations of the warrior, the mage, and the thief in the 3 trials of Craglorn and stuff like that, and like their actual things, how things are getting weird there. I feel like that's a theme throughout this entire episode is things are getting weird. But then you have the snake or the serpent. I love that this originally has been like, this has kind of been one of the staple with mild changes throughout it. But it's like, the constellations have been there since pretty much the beginning, almost like at least the framework of them, including the weird like unstar version that's kind of scooting around through the constellations.
Right. And we never get a description about what an unstar is.
Yeah. That's the thing that I find funny. It's like, what the hell is an unstar?
It explains so many things, but there's not like what is an unstar? Well, an unstar is this. It doesn't tell us.
No, it's just like, yep. Instead of just like, oh yeah, there's nothing here. It's an unstar.
Yeah.
All right.
I'm assuming that's the antithesis of a hole to Aetherius, but we don't have a hole to any other realm. It's not a hole to Oblivion, because Oblivion is the thing that we're seeing through to see the stars. So it implies that there's an Aetherius, a realm of magic beyond Oblivion and all the gods, but there may also be a realm of negative nothingness. This idea of like Sithis, this other thing that represents the absence of things that's just kind of out there somewhere. And there are bridges, unstars to that in the shape of a snake, which is like this. It's a dark concept that is not illuminated by any of the words in this document, which seems very appropriate. Doesn't it?
Yeah. And I was trying to think of the other word that I was saying, like, other than constellations. The thing in Craglorn is the physical manifestations of them are referred to as celestials.
Right.
It's like the physical version of them. And it's like the serpent kind of running amok throughout that expansion is super weird that it's just like maybe I'm not remembering this right. I'm trying to actually double check this. I meant to look this, but it's like even the unstar thing is like, I don't really specifically remember much about them. Yeah, it doesn't seem like there's much on.
I don't think they reference it in the quest line as unstar. No, they don't. So I don't think that comes up.
It's just like, the idea of this just like unstar idea is so strange.
Yeah, it's so strange. All right, so let's move on. If that's what stars and unstars are and constellations and all that, what is the sun? Magnus is the sun, the largest hole in Oblivion and the gateway to magic. Magnus was present at the creation of the mortal plane and, in fact, was its architect. Lorcan was its advocate and inspiration. This all ties back to some of the other theories that, like, the elves like to believe and all of that, right? Prehistoric, before ME 2500 star year, Nirn was a magical place and highly unstable to the first mortals. Magnus then left, some say in disgust, and Oblivion filled in the void with the void. Let me say that again. He left, some say in disgust, and Oblivion filled in the void with the capital V void. You and I have speculated about the void before as well, which feels very similar to unstars. Maybe where the bridge that the unstars go to, that's the void. His escape was not easy, and tatters of Magnus remain in the firmament as stars. So it's now given us 2 different definitions in the same document for stars. Stars are holes and bridges to Aetherius, or they're the parts of remains of Magnus, which ties back to the high elf belief that Magnus tore a hole in the shroud around Oblivion, and the stars are also little holes that he tore in going through that as well. Or they were other minor deities that also went with him tearing holes.
Yeah, they were stuck to his coattails or something.
Right. So this kind of ties into that in yet a slightly different way that it's stated, but also has this whole thing about like Oblivion filled in the void with the void. Yeah, Magnus was here.
That is such a Kirkbridean sentence.
What?
It filled in the void, so just empty space, with the void of like, capital V void of like this other realm of nothingness and like abyss. It's like,
right. And it almost implies that without Magnus here, that magic would have left. And so maybe magic still trickles in through the holes. But that void of, it's almost implying that the void of magic was filled by the void, which also supplies a form of energy that's like magic.
Right. So is it like unmagic the way we just had unstars?
Right. But we've seen void magic. We've seen people use the power of the void for all sorts of nefarious things, right?
Well, and that's just it. We see the like void energy at points in the games. It's like, is it literally like, is it being referred to oftentimes as like, oh yeah, this is another form of magicka? Or is it literally just because it was brought up in this book, is this like the antithesis of magic?
Right.
Like,
it is another form of power
like
that's
unmagic. And it's just
unmagic.
It has weird effects that mimic what you would get from a weird magicka spell type of thing.
Right. It leaves a lot of speculation, a lot of room.
Yeah, this like some of this stuff is really, really strange getting into. It's like, okay, this could it's weird that this isn't. It is like tangentially related to what's in the game because like there's remnants of it in the game.
Right.
But because it's not physically in the game, it's just such a it's almost part of the canon, but then not.
Yeah, it's similar to the monomyth. It like kind of touches up on the monomyth, but it doesn't actually. It goes in slightly different directions or has slightly different explanations for things. That's why I find it so interesting.
This one gets this is the monomyth written by Kirkbride for sure. Like,
yeah.
Because there's a lot of this that's very, very open for weird directions, but at the same time, like since everything in the series is so gray area, it makes sense that there's supposed to be different interpretations. So I am surprised that this was cut. If intentionally cut, I almost want. I am of the mindset this was not intentionally left out.
Yeah, maybe not. And here's another fun point. You said it's like the monomyth as written by Kirkbride. Kirkbride wrote the monomyth. I just double checked this. Yeah, and here's another really fun point. It was originally posted and listed the author as Temple Zero Society.
I wonder if that's the edited version.
Yeah, I wonder if this, or maybe this was an early version that he refined into the monomyth.
Yeah, so maybe that's it. Maybe we're literally seeing what happened by, okay, here's his original writings of this, and it kind of got run through the normalcy editor to make it more palatable for like the general masses.
Right. But the monomyth also covers a bunch of other stuff too.
Oh, it does. And I'm sure they maybe wanted to flesh out some other specific things they wanted to talk about, or maybe he was just like, oh, you know what? We could cover this. This would be important to bring up or whatever. But yeah, I wonder if this is almost like the first draft of the monomyth.
Maybe. Well, we got two more sections to get to. We've got this one. What is the sky? The sky is another visual phenomenon caused by mortal mental stress. The night sky. A lot of
mortal mental stress in this world.
Right, because we're looking out into infinity and we can't understand what we're seeing. So we have to. It gives us this like intellectual dilemma where we have to like justify what we're sensing with something that our brains can conceive of. So it says here, the night sky in particular, the sky is as impossible as planets. In essence, when you look into the sky, quote, you look outside the material plane. At night, Nirn is surrounded by oblivion. The day sky is the multicolored elemental cloak of Magnus the sun. Let me say that again. The day sky is the multicolored elemental cloak of Magnus the sun. It changes colors as elemental influences rise and fall. Thus, when one looks at the day sky, they see into the raiments of Aetherius and stare at magic. When you're seeing daylight, when you're seeing a blue sky overhead, you're actually just looking at streams of magic falling to Nirn.
Look, I don't want to say that totally makes sense, but with the God ray technology that they have in these games, I'm going to allow that entirely because
it kind of makes sense.
It looks so pretty, whether you're playing Oblivion, whether you're honestly even in Morrowind, Oblivion, Elder Scrolls Online, Skyrim. You stare at the sky and I will like zone out because it's so friggin' pretty.
All the God rays coming down.
And there's just God rays coming through light. You know what? I am totally going to allow this. That makes perfect sense to me. I'm on board with this one 100%.
All right. And then we have the final one here. How is the universe created? This gets way more expanded on in the monomyth, but
Sure does.
Yeah, but it says here those phenomena of the spirit realm that inhabitants of Nirn interpret as the universe came into being during the Dawn era. It was created through magic and myth. Let me say that again. It was created through magic and myth. Like the belief in the stories of things was also part of the creation itself. Weird. And this process is interpreted in a variety of ways, too numerous to mention here. These myths can be accessed elsewhere in the monomyth. So that elsewhere link shows up at the bottom of this document and goes to the monomyth on the UESP. I think that also implies that maybe that was the original intent of this document when it was first posted, because the monomyth was written at a very similar time period. But I don't know how to confirm that or not.
Right. And the only problem I have with that is I feel like there was a really good situation for when these myths can be accessed elsewhere, and it was spelt like these zones elsewhere. I feel like that was a missed opportunity.
But yeah, so that wraps it up. Any other thoughts on this?
And again, the universe creation thing, which is interesting, that it's like, it seems like there's a straight up tie-in sort of at the end there, where it's like, it kind of like, it does feel like this is like a preliminary draft, so to speak, of what we get with the monomyth.
Yeah.
And again, the monomyth does a little more in some degrees and less weird in other ways. But I don't know. I feel like those could both coincide in game.
I totally think that this could have been in the games.
Yeah.
I don't see why this, I mean, it would have given us more things to discuss, to debate, and it was posted to the forums. So it was intentionally shared with the public before Morrowind came out.
Right. So it also
still
had been around for a while.
Yeah, it's still in the Imperial Library, which is a website that's been around forever. Like, if you want to read through all the books and things, they're all there on the Imperial Library. It's not like this was something that they were hiding from the public. It just somehow didn't make it in those games.
Right, which is, it's even weirder that it seems like it was supposed to be in Morrowind and Oblivion, and it didn't make it into either, even if it was an oversight in Morrowind, because back then we didn't have day one updates and patches and stuff like that. Like, if there was something wrong with Morrowind on my Xbox, because that's how I played it on the original Xbox, spoiler alert, if there was something wrong with it, it was wrong forever, because that was not going to update.
You weren't getting updates on that system.
No.
Yeah, that's the way games were made back then. Yeah, it's an interesting thing. Hercene in chat says, I just remembered that one of the 36 lessons of Vivek, there's a quote that says, written in uncertainty, like the podcast with Aramithius, our friend Aramithius does. Do you think that may play a part in the subject? I think uncertainty has to do with the concept, like deeper concepts of the world and the concept of the unreliable narrator. And
right. Everything is just like, everything in the game is basically just like, well, it could be this.
Right. But which is very real.
You don't have a godlike entity telling you what is what. You have all these fallible things in the world giving you the information about the world, like we do in our world.
Right. There's a reason in our world. I talk about this on like some of the like first episode or two of this podcast. There's a reason why there are dozens and dozens and dozens, if not hundreds, of creation stories in human history across human cultures. And some of them have certain similarities, and some of them are super wacky and different. And that's because we don't have an objective view and a scientific provable version of that.
Right.
That's that kind of story. We do have science to help elucidate things about, like, oh, maybe the Earth is this old, or maybe the universe is this old, or this is how long light takes to travel from one place to another. So that star over there is 4 million years old that I'm looking at right now.
It's us discovering the things that surround us, as opposed to some giant entity that's just like, yep, so this is this, and this is this, which you get in a lot of fiction. It's just like, oh, first this happened and then this happened. Okay, that's very easy to wrap your brain around. But the Elder Scrolls series is written from within the series, which is why it's kind of unique in so many ways.
Yeah. So it leaves a lot of questions. Well, this is cosmology. You're welcome to go look it up. It's online on the Imperial Library, on the UESP.
Yep.
You can go read it yourself. We'd love to hear your perspectives on this. If we missed something, if you're like, oh my God.
Anything that you took away that we didn't, or it's like, oh, well, you guys said this, but I actually think it's this type of thing. This is a good one for varying theories depending upon how you see it. Which is why this was a good catch when you brought this one up for me. I was like, oh, wow, I haven't seen this one in a while. So I was like, oh, all right. Yeah, I'm on board.
Yeah. So please let us know. If you have any other thoughts, jump onto the Robots Radio Discord. There's a channel for this show specifically and all the other shows on the network. Let us know your thoughts. Also, if there is a document that you'd like us to take a look at and kind of dig through and give you our perspective on it, please share. Because I can't guarantee we'll go over everything that gets submitted.
No, we've had some suggestions, though, that either lead us to something we wanted to do, or we just haven't gotten to what somebody suggested yet. Like this was kind of an offshoot of what Rob suggested.
Right. And sometimes the suggestion is like, oh, well, that's like that. It gives us 5 minutes to talk about a thing, but it's not enough to do a whole episode.
We do want to give you about an hour-long episode of it.
Right. So maybe we can add up some of those onto like a hodgepodge episode where we go over a bunch of little things. But don't be afraid to suggest stuff.
Yeah, or start with that and go in another direction to expand upon it if we can find something that relates to it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So that's going to do it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed our look at cosmology by the Temple Zero Society. Lotus, you got other stuff going on?
Yeah, we should be hopefully recording an episode of Tales this weekend to discuss all of the stuff in ESO, as well as White Strix Mayhem, the big PvP event just ended. So we're going to go over that. But yeah, other than that, PAX East is coming up, so I'll be at that. If anybody's in the area and going to PAX East, let me know. Come say hi or whatever.
Awesome.
I should be there that weekend. I don't think I'm going to be able to make it there during the week this time.
Okay.
But I should be there Saturday and Sunday. But yeah, other than that, just kind of the normal trying to find some game time and stuff like that, and recording shows.
Yeah, for sure. Her scene reminded me to maybe get a random page from the UESP. Yeah, we should. I'm getting the random page button.
That's right.
I've meant to do this. I keep forgetting. I
loved that. We need to add this to the notes.
Yeah. So
we should pin that to the top of our discussion that we have each week. Remember our random USP.
Absolutely. All right. So I hit random. This is what we got. Arena. This is an arena reference.
All right.
Heldorn Mount. Heldorn Mount is a town located in northern Hammerfell, southeast of Skaven and southwest of Dragonstar. The ruler is Baron Shatan. Its rival is Belkarth Guard. Heldorn Mount has road connections to Dragonstar and Skaven. That's basically, it lists all, like, there's Arena is a crazy game because the scope of Arena and like those early games are so big. It has multiple inns. I'll just read a few of them. Black Skull, Blue Dragon, Blue Huntsman, Crimson Skull. You can see a kind of trend here. Devil's Wolf, Dirty Cup, Green Dragon, Green Jug, Haunted Castle, Haunted Dungeon, Red Castle. You can tell that there was like procedural generation, right? Thirsty Dragon, Unfortunate Griffin, White Chasm, White Dungeon. Griffin. Yes. Has some temples. Brotherhood of Faith, Brotherhood of the One, Conclave of Solitude, Conclave of the One, Order of the Knights of Hope. These are not names that have shown up anywhere else. It also has a bunch of stores.
Go to the Unfortunate Griffin.
Like this is where we hang out. The Unfortunate Griffin.
No, Unfortunate Griffin.
The Thirsty Dragon.
On the coast.
Yeah. And then it's got a bunch of stores. Randoms merchandise, which was auto-filled, I suppose, whenever you loaded up the town for the first time.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah. Elite merchandise, Elite Tool Store, Randoms Tool Store, Randoms General Sundries, Rare Accoutrements. Well, that's a fun word.
Rare accoutrements.
Rare Tool Store, The Adventurers Accoutrement, The Adventurers Equipment Store, The Adventurers Provisions, The Adventurers Sundries, The Basic Tool Store. It just goes on. There's I don't know, 7 more of those. But that's
Hercene, I'm so glad you brought that up. I forgot about that, and I love that segment so much. We need to remember to do that.
Absolutely.
Just a random article page, because that was one of the best additions when Dave mentioned that. It was like, oh, yeah, it was just a random page. It's like, that's amazing.
Yeah, random. We got to always remember to do that. But that's your random UESP page for the night, for the day, whatever. And, of course, you can check out my other shows and stuff, robotsradio.net. If you're into Fallout, the Fallout TV show, the new trailer dropped. It's freaking amazing. I was excited about it before with some reservations. I have way less reservations now.
Yeah, I am really hopeful that show is going to land.
I think it's going to be great. It feels like it's got the horror, it's got the humor, but it also has heart. It looks like it's got all the right components. So I'm excited about that. I've been talking about it a lot on the Fallout Lorecast. So if you're into Fallout and you want to learn more about that world or see my take on certain things, head over, check out that podcast. Lots of other shows, robotsradio.net if you're looking for more stuff. But thank you for being here. Lotus, it's been fun as usual.
As always.
Yeah, we'll see you next time. Stay safe out there when you are reading those crazy old documents because they might break your mind. See you later. Thanks for tuning in to the Elder Scrolls Lorecast. Check out robotsradio.net for more podcasts just like this and join us on the Robots Radio Discord. Be part of a community of over 5,000 people who are excited about video games and so much more. Robots Radio. Games, lore, stories, community. Just press play.